Hey everyone, Richard from Digital Foundry here, and welcome to 2018, our first video of the year. Yes, we are returning to PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds on Xbox One and Xbox One X. And joining me to talk about the latest version of the game, Tom Morgan.
Hi there.
How's it all going?
Pretty good. What better way to kick off the new year than to play one of the biggest games of last year?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one this because we posted a patch 1 analysis just before we went on holiday, and then literally the day afterwards or the day after that patch 2 dropped, and since then we've had patch 3 which adds some additional squad options, and that's what we're playing here. Now Bluehole has said that there may well be another patch coming in early January, in which case yes, we shall return to this title again. And we're kicking off here with analysis that shows the beginning of the game. Now, one thing we noticed on patch 1 was that essentially the frame rate is really bad when the game begins, but then it kind of stabilizes at 30 frames per second, a couple of minutes in. And it seems to me, Tom, not sure if you agree with me on this one, but it seems to me that that sort of stabilization at 30 frames per second seems to happen a bit quicker now.
It does seem to be a kind of a running theme, definitely, and you can write off the kind of lobby area we are running around the aircraft and the sort of initial landing. That's not representative of the game at large, but yeah, when you get on the ground, 30 FPS is a more stable number, not accounting for network latency issues, which we have sort of covered in the past.
Okay, yeah, that's something we need to cover, because in our patch 1 analysis we complained that the kind of rubber banding effect, the sort of micro teleporting, actually made the gameplay experience worse in many ways than the launch version, which is not ideal. From my perspective, well, it seems to me that the rubber banding is still there, possibly reduced a tad, but still an issue and still massively annoying when you're just, literally just trying to walk around a house and go through doors. It's just much more difficult than it should be to perform this basic task.
Yeah, it's a bit farcical when you're just trying to get through a door and you're just struggling to do it. It's worth saying we're running on the same network here in the office, 2 Xbox Ones, and the fact is we can't be sure of what's going on server side at any point, but definitely that rubber banding is just dreadful. It absolutely takes you out of the moment, and you can't even do basic functional things like even trying to target a weapon on the floor to pick it up with the X button.
It's really not ideal whatsoever, and in our last analysis we pointed out that the kind of performance drops and the wobbliness seemed to happen when there were people in the area, and that seems to have actually been improved slightly, I think, but it's still not ideal. And one thing which we're going to highlight here in this clip, we've got an encounter here, both of us are ganging up on this guy near the house here, and I think the issue is that when we actually begin an encounter, when we're actually shooting other people, the base Xbox One really isn't holding up as well as the X.
It is largely 30 FPS while running across the terrain, but once you get anywhere close to someone you really need that response time to finish off, it suddenly kind of tanks, especially on Xbox One.
Well, I think the point is that, you kind of need a solid frame rate all of the time, and especially when you're in a firefight, and I just didn't get it here in this particular confrontation. Now, I actually moved into Spectator Mode here because I'm following you after I was killed, and in our first video we noticed that the frame rate would tank to 20 FPS in Spectator Mode. This does seem to have been improved, as you can see here.
It's handy seeing it this way because you see the visual differences at least. I was being really cautious because I was thinking, well, I'd need to somehow find a way around this guy, and I'm suspecting he's in third person view and can actually see me over the wall. But yeah, so not an action-packed finish, and I think I end up getting downed around here.
Yeah, this one didn't end particularly well for either of us. But yeah, I mean, there are scenarios where both games generally hold fairly well at 30 frames per second. So here we're ganging up on this guy here. I think you actually claimed the kill on him here.
I think in the end it turned out I've got a preference for shotguns and things with a sort of wide spread. It really feels difficult to use single shotguns with the level of latency on the controller and the network latency as well. So in the end my preferred tactic was shotgun and a sort of strafing and waiting until that reticule comes over the enemy and then pulling the trigger. But it's not ideal. I mean, I never feel like I've really earned my kill at the end. It's all a bit of a desperate scramble to get a shot off and see that sort of blood splatter.
Well, I was playing on the base Xbox One, and the issue I had is that it just never seemed as though when you were aiming at somebody and shooting them that the bullets were actually hitting, and I was having frame rate issues as well in many of the encounters. Here we're actually looting the corpse of the guy that you just killed here. One thing that is worth pointing out is that yes, the Xbox One X does indeed have depth of field that kicks in when the menu system is active, and it's not active on Xbox One. But you can see that at this point the X is struggling with its frame rate here. It is dropping frames because of that depth of field effect, which is being rendered at native 4K.
Well, we do know, having looked at the launch code for this, the visual settings were divided when it came to post stuff. So lens flares and bloom and all these sort of effects that go over the top of the game are stripped away on Xbox One. I think below the PC's low setting as well is what we found out at the time. So the lack of depth of field there is indicative that that's not really changed. And looking at the frame rate, you know, it does suggest that maybe they shouldn't broach those settings.
Yeah, one thing I think worth pointing out is that I don't think the visual feature set of the game has improved. There were some anti-aliasing tweaks before, but nothing else has changed. And there's still view distance and texture improvements on the X, along with, of course, the 1080p versus 4K resolution divide between the two systems. Okay, so one thing I wanted to do as we move back into the beginning of our next game is that, well, here we're looking at the lobby system. No surprises here. It's still really dreadful, looks awful, terrible first impression for the game. But one thing I wanted to point out here is that, well, we were talking about the stabilization effect on 30 frames per second kicking in once you've landed, but in this area it just seemed to be poor performance from start to finish. Again, the X does have an advantage, but you know, literally we're in a really basic area here. No perceptible reason why this area should actually have worse performance than any other that we had, which did seem to run better. I mean, we still have this very dynamic nature to the game where literally anything can happen, any performance drop can kick in at any moment. I think there have been general improvements, and yeah, I mean, you do actually finally hit that 30 frames per second target a bit further in, but it took a lot longer to get there this time.
Was this the game where there were actually people around this village? I can't actually remember.
I still think that might be the issue. I mean, especially on the base Xbox One, it does seem to be the case that actually being in the presence of other users can cause issues, and obviously that has a profound impact on gameplay. I mean, I found it borderline unplayable just when you really need it to be responsive.
Okay, so this is a bigger city area where we finally, after several games in a row, finally get a vehicle, and finally we can get an idea of almost matched performance tests as we move across the terrain at speed, which is a bottleneck for the game, as we found out in previous tests.
Yeah, in the last patch and indeed in our launch analysis, just getting into a car and driving about the landscape seems to cause real issues for this particular game, so that's exactly what we did here. We found this little Dacia here, and you know, as you can see, to begin with, 30 frames per second, no problem at all. But as soon as we actually start to move around the landscape at any kind of speed, well, the X is holding up okay, but the base Xbox One, once again, massive performance problems here, 25 to 30 frames per second, and it really isn't ideal.
It does feel like you do have an edge over regular Xbox One players.
Right, okay, in this particular clip, we've switched to the first-person view here, which gives a very close approximation of gameplay across the two players, literally just a side-by-side view here. And yeah, you can see that it is still wobbly on the Xbox One X, but the One is really struggling here in like-for-like tests, and the frame time's quite unattractive. But well, I think we identified previously that traversal at speed across the landscape seemed to cause real issues for the game. Nothing has improved there really. Xbox One X owners definitely get the better deal though. And there are areas of the game where the second player can be leaning out of the vehicle and shooting at opponents here, but it's really difficult to actually aim and hit anyone, especially on the base Xbox One. But note, as we stop the vehicle and get out, well, suddenly the frame rate has completely stabilized on both systems.
It's a bit problematic, yeah.
Something that we did in our previous videos was to basically attract fire by making a lot of noise, driving through a city, trying to basically pick up opponents who would give chase, and yeah, that caused problems. This actually seems to be a little bit better now, but you know, you can still see that the Xbox One is struggling here. And this is a point where we actually encountered a crash to dashboard, which we will see very shortly. It's kind of weird, to be honest.
Yeah, after all this time spent driving around trying to lure someone in the big moment we were waiting for, kind of ended up with you just crashing and me suddenly getting shot in the head, and I'm just looking at your still alive body in the sidecar here and thinking, well, that's game over. Well, that was a bit anticlimactic.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're just going to round up here. It seems to be that the Xbox One X, I think we've categorically proven here that the X users have a big advantage in that they maintain target frame rate in encounters with a lot more consistency than the base unit. And yeah, to illustrate this, we're going to highlight a kind of interesting strategic battle that we had in one particular game where Tom and I were looting a house and I noticed some people outside. They were lurking behind a wall. So this is 2-on-2. And I'm on the balcony here firing crossbow bolts at the guys hiding behind the wall, and I'm kind of telling Tom to get up here and give us a hand. And, well, as you can see, what happens is that while I'm shooting at the guys behind the wall and Tom is literally joining me side by side, I have big performance dips where he doesn't. And again, you know, this is massively unfair to users of the base Xbox. I mean, I don't understand how the conditions could be any better matched than they are here. And the X has a big advantage. It just holds the target frame rate more. I'm going to assume this is possibly down to the CPU bump. I mean, we're talking about 2.3 gigahertz versus 1.75. I mean, that is significant here for a game like this that does seem to have some kind of big CPU dependency. But again, I mean, you know, I'm down to like 22 frames per second at one point here. Tom is a locked 30 on the X. It's just not fair.
In terms of what you're getting visually from the two, there isn't enough to justify the frame rate drops on Xbox One. It's got to be CPU contention, and at that crucial moment, we are being let down by the game. It is one of the best shootouts we've had, though, across 8 games we played for these tests. But at every point, it felt like not just a battle between me and the enemies, but with the game itself and the controls and the frame rate.
Well, I think we're going to round it off there. Bottom line, Xbox One X users, I think we've categorically proven they have a much better experience with this game. Now, we're going to be getting a new patch fairly imminently if everything we've heard from the developer is true, but that's all we've got for you for now. Please do like and subscribe to support what we do here at Digital Foundry, and we'll see you soon.